thing that has been sort of on my mind recently after watching a Theo Von podcast. I know, why would I do that? It was at the suggestion of a boy, and I do things boys suggest of me. Um, why did I say that? And what occurred to me is that he just plainly did not know what is meant by privilege when we're talking about privilege in the context of male privilege and all of that. And, most of the time when I see people misunderstanding that, it strikes me as deliberative because in my mind, we had these discussions and learned these things years ago. But I had to take a moment and stop and think, is that necessarily true? People don't see all of the same things that you do. We have to step out of our bubbles a little bit, which is all to say, a lot of times I think we forget the importance of basic educational content. I think it comes not necessarily from a space of I don't want to educate you. If you're putting out essays on YouTube, or if you're doing political content, or if you're doing media analysis or any such thing, most of the time you're going to consider what you're doing educational content. Now, personally, I don't necessarily view what I'm making as educational content. I don't like the word content in the first place. I view video essays as a form of literature. So I'm writing. I'm doing sort of creative writing. I'm writing essays. Sometimes they're to educate, sometimes they're just to express something, which I guess is a form of education, but I'm not necessarily always setting out to educate, if that makes sense. But sometimes I do. And a lot of us are attempting to educate people, whether that's ourselves or our viewers or people who aren't necessarily on the same side as we are. And I think what happens is that we consider our own selves not to be special, if that makes sense. I know what you're thinking. Everyone kind of assumes themselves to be special, which is true. And everyone is also special. I am like a woo-woo kind of person who thinks that. But, I'm thinking back to an H-Bomb video, the one on plagiarism, where he mentions the art of video essays. And he talks about how writing this stuff and making it, and, he puts a lot more editing forward in his things, and he's of the type that uses clips from what he's talking about. I'm iffy on that. I don't think it's copyright infringement when other people are doing it. I'm just personally uncomfortable with using clips in that way because they're not necessarily important to what I'm doing. What I talk about doesn't really need B footage. I don't feel artistically inclined toward it. That's a small tangent. Apologies for that. But, he said that, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember it exactly, and I'm not about to go watch that long video just for this. He said something along the lines of, we forget that we have put in effort to do the things that we have done. When I talk about music and the saxophone, I portray it like it's the easiest instrument because in my mind it is the easiest instrument because I picked it up and I'm pretty decent at it, so it can't be that hard. And other instruments are harder because I'm not as good at them, right? But you do have to do things to learn how to play the saxophone, and you still have to learn musicality. It takes a lot of people a long time to get a proper omniture. And that's the mouth placement and the chin flatness instead of the scrunched up chin, and the correct tension in the mouth corners. And so I think going along the same lines of things, we often assume that our knowledge isn't necessarily special or specialized. And so when we are speaking, we're simply communicating on the level of other people because we're assuming other people are on that same level as us because we are not special, we're near the baseline, right? Like, that's kind of the thinking that goes into it. So we don't necessarily go over some of the basics. And that's kind of a disservice. I don't think everyone needs to be going and adding like 20-minute spiels going over the basics of everything they're talking about when they're doing a video. But it is important to kind of retread topics and go over information that to you is obvious, but might not be known to someone who doesn't either have the life experience you have or the education that you have. Maybe they haven't read the same articles. Maybe they weren't on the same internet spaces. Maybe they weren't on Tumblr back in 2014. Maybe they were never taught what privilege actually means in that context. I do think a lot of people are going to be disingenuous when they say, or when they misunderstand certain political things. But that's not true of everyone, and we shouldn't always assume malice. Some people genuinely do not know, and a proper education could help put them not necessarily on our side, but at least more understanding, right? Like, I'm sort of, at the moment, kind of thinking about putting together a video about male privilege, which is like well-treaded ground, everyone's talked about it, and why would I be the best person to talk about it or whatever, right? But, there are groups of people who haven't had that conversation in context. Like the Theo Von thing, it's the misunderstanding because of the use of the word privilege that you must be having a good life, etc., etc. And a lot of people who go down that lane don't actually care about words or what you're saying. They're just, wanting free reign to be racist or sexist or whatever. I'm not saying that was necessarily him. I haven't seen any of his other stuff. But, this is just a very long-winded way of saying I think it's important to do basic education sometimes on things that we think are well known, because they might not be. And people might need some help. So at least we can communicate better, And that's what all this is about. It's about communication. Okay, that's a long ranting ramble over. See ya.